Our epistle reading this morning is from Paul's letter to the Romans. In fact, that will probably come as no surprise to you. The chapter 13, verses 8 to 14. It can be found on page 160 of the New Testament section of your Pew Bibles. This is in the midst of a series of instructions from Paul about how to live in community. Listen for the word of the Lord. Owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is fulfilling of the law. Besides this, you know what time it is, how it is now the moment for you to wake from sleep. For salvation is nearer to us now than when we became believers. The night is far gone. The day is near. Let us then lay aside the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us live honorably as in the day, not in reveling and drunkenness, not in debauchery and licentiousness, not in quarreling and jealousy. Instead, put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. Our gospel reading comes to us from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 18, verses 15 to 20. And it can be found on page 20 of the New Testament section of your Pew Bibles. This is set relatively late in Jesus' ministry after the Transfiguration, and once again talks about living in community. Listen again for the word of the Lord. This is the voice of Jesus. If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you're not listened to, take one or two others along with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly I tell you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among you. The word of the Lord.
Perhaps you have been inspired, encouraged, and amazed, as have I, by the images of people helping each other, neighbors and strangers alike, lending a helping hand, showing love, sharing what they have in the wake of Hurricane Harvey. The photo of a midwife riding an inflatable swan to get her patient at the birthing center drew my attention. Kathy Rood has been a midwife for 24 years and says she has waded through floodwaters in the past to deliver babies, but never in waters as deep as she saw during the recent flooding in her town of Katy, Texas. Rood said the floodwaters on her street were up to her waist, making it impossible to transport her birthing supplies without damaging them. When she learned her patient, Andrea Haley, had been having contractions for several days and was approaching active labor, the 2 women began planning a way to get Rood to the birthing center for delivery. As Haley's labor progressed, she drove with her mother and husband Daniel to attempt to pick up the midwife in their truck. And when they arrived in Rude's neighborhood, however, they learned it would be impossible to get down the street due to the floodwaters. Haley spotted a woman on a large white inflatable swan drifting down the flooded street. So she called out to the woman on the inflatable swan and asked if she'd be willing to help get her midwife to a less flooded area. Rude said she laughed when she saw the inflatable swan at her door, but she hopped on board and loaded her birthing supplies onto the swan to keep them from getting damaged in the floodwaters. They made it to the birthing center where she helped Haley deliver her baby boy, Bennett. Or perhaps you saw the before and after photos of the residents at La Vida Bella Assisted Living Home in Dickinson, Texas. 18 residents in wheelchairs and one cat sitting in waist-high water until a rescue operation was put in place. The residents were airlifted out of their home by the National Guard and the Galveston City Emergency Crew. Not long after the first photo of wheelchairs and waist-high water went viral, another photo was posted of the same residents, now safe and dry, being cared for at a different assisted living facility. I imagine there will be many harrowing birth stories in the aftermath of Hurricanes Harvey and Irma that will be passed on and shared over the years to come and become part of family lore. One such story that I read, and perhaps you did as well, was about the birth of baby Adrielle, born to Andrea and Greg Smith. Andrea went into labor while Harvey's floodwaters were rising. She's unable to get out of her Houston apartment. She wasn't able to contact 911, so she and her husband prepared for a home delivery. They put the word out to the folks in the apartment complex that this is what they were preparing for, and then some medical supplies arrived from medical professionals who lived in their apartment building. The fire station was alerted because someone in the apartment complex sent a message to an acquaintance whose father lived near the local fire station. Unbeknownst to the Smiths, the firefighters went into action. They sent a dump truck as a rescue vehicle to the apartment building, and when the dump truck arrived, the Smiths were notified that the truck was there to take them to the hospital. One by one, neighbors clasped hands and formed a chain in waist-high water, carefully guiding Andrea and Greg to the truck's bed, where they climbed on board and were driven to the hospital. Having twice miscarried, the couple had become intensely focused on their faith. The baby was born, and her father, Greg, told news reporters they felt that everything about that pregnancy was in God's hands, and that's why they named her Adrielle, which means she belongs to God. Lastly, love for neighbor was so clearly expressed in yesterday's New York Times article by Kevin Sack that the title says it all. The Prayer Circle: Texans Rebuild After Harvey as a Practice of Faith. It has a long subtitle, but it's also very revealing. This is the subtitle. After the storm, 17 people joined in prayer before clearing out the flooded house of an aging widow. God, they insisted, was also there. Angie Klimple, who gets by mostly on Social Security benefits, now lives with relatives nearly 2 hours away from her home, which is on Blanche Street in Wharton County, Texas. It makes for long days when she drives to Blanche Street to work on her house. She misses her gardening and even mowing her yard, which she still loves to do at age 80. Klimple did not have flood insurance, and while she filled out the forms for assistance from FEMA, she doesn't know whether it'll be enough to make the house habitable. In 2008, when Hurricane Ike blew through Galveston, she went there with a church group and spent days clearing out houses. I felt so blessed to do it, she said. She never imagined, of course, that the tables might turn. By midweek, some of Mrs. Klimple's despair had lifted, and her sense of humor had returned. When I first saw it all, it upset me, she said. But then I thought, I needed to clean the house anyway. bad I had just dusted everything. She nodded at a new set of volunteers who were prying out drywall and disinfecting the house with bleach. They were what mattered. When I saw the crew that came in, all those wonderful people and friends, I was so thankful. She said, I feel like the Lord's trying to bring people together. He wants us to be nicer to each other. Owe no one anything except to love one another, we read in Romans 13:8. I thought last week would be our final week roaming through Romans, but Romans never ends. Paul, in his letter to the church in Corinth, in 1 Corinthians 13, writes, love never ends. We have this summer series with Romans that never ends. But it, too, has something to do with love. The reading we heard from Romans that Linton read to us is all about the kind of love your neighbor as yourself love that is being modeled in post-Hurricane Harvey, Texas. This is love centered on others. The epistle reading is framed by the guiding exhortation to owe nothing but love in verse 8, and the statement in verse 14 to be clothed in Jesus Christ and not to indulge in selfish desires. In this passage, we are faced with the very other-centered nature of love as defined by the cross. What is the implication of owing no one anything except to love one another? One commentator puts it this way: to owe nothing but love to one another is to own the reality that we are all completely dependent on God's grace, not only for our forgiveness, but for our very existence. And it reframes how we live in relation to one another in our everyday interactions. It reframes it in such a way that other obligations become significantly less reality-shaping than they once were. Paul invites his hearers in Rome, and he invites you and me to relinquish our claims to ourselves and our claims over others, however right and just they might seem according to our own cultural narratives. Paul says, you and I have been crucified with Christ. Love understood through the lens of the cross means owing no one anything except to love one another. The people who are digging out from under hurricane wreckage seem to understand this kind of love instinctively. What does this kind of love look like in the context of Jesus' teachings on settling disputes in the church community that we heard in our second reading in Matthew's Gospel? Don't we have an obligation to go to our neighbor when they sin and speak with them about that? Our gospel text refers to relations among church members. It says that relationships in the church are so important that it's worth going to extraordinary lengths to keep them healthy. When there's a problem, we're not to sulk, nor are we to write each other off, nor are we to build walls of separation, nor are we to refuse to talk to one another. When a problem exists, we are to take the initiative and solve it. Jesus is saying to take relationships seriously. Why? Because if we take Jesus at his word, it means that Jesus is there in the midst of those relationships. And Jesus is here even when it's just a few of us who are gathered. It is helpful to be reminded of that promise from our Lord, especially when picking through the wreckage of one's life. recall 80-year-old Angie Klimpel's story and the rebuilding of her house on Blanche Street in Wharton County, Texas. Across the flood zone, the water's victims have endured the first 2 weeks of dislocation with the help of Samaritans of all cloths, family members, friends, co-workers, volunteers from near and far, and an array of faith-based groups. With homeowners racing against time to limit the advantage of rot and mold, the availability of free manual labor can make all the difference. Those who appeared within hours at Mrs. Klimpel's house, as if by spontaneous generation, ranged in age from 6 to 77. Some didn't know one another, or for that matter, the Klimpels. It mattered little. Each felt called by faith to lend their hands, their legs, their backs to an elderly woman in distress. For Jeff Klimpel, Angie's son, the deepest emotions welled when he remembered his father and all the meaningful moments in that house now in ruins. But the tears also flowed from the unexpected arrival of so much help. To me, it was a gift from the Lord, he said. You know, bad things happen to good people, and we don't know why. But this is what the Lord wants, for you to love your neighbor like yourself. Another way of saying that is the way the Apostle Paul puts it in Romans 13:9. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. And recall the long subtitle to Klimpel's story. It concludes, God, they insisted, was there. If we take Jesus' words at face value, as do the Klimpels, then yes, God was there. God was there when the inflatable swan showed up. God was there with the emergency rescue crews airlifting wheelchairs to safety. God was there for baby Adriel's birth. And God is here. As we prepare for a new program year at Lewinsville Presbyterian Church, may you and I find ways to inspire, encourage, and amaze as we help neighbors and strangers alike, lending a helping hand, showing love, and sharing what we have in the wake of this new year and of all that is to come. For Jesus says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them. And now to the one who accomplished far more than we can ever ask or imagine. To God be all glory and honor forever and ever. Amen.